Good day. This program, once more, is about the situation in Afghanistan. I make no apology for returning to this topic because I can say for a definite fact that this issue of the developments in the war in Afghanistan is almost certainly a major topic, if not the major topic, of discussion in all the leading world capitals. Washington, Moscow, Beijing, New Delhi, probably to a certain extent in London also. They are all assessing, looking at the situation in Afghanistan, and I suspect that they are all collectively astonished, baffled to some extent, angry in various cases. And the anger, by the way, I expect is universal amongst all of them, though they are angry in different ways and about different people. Now, the reason I have to return to this subject and the reason why all these discussions are taking place is because of the astonishing speed of developments on the ground. Now, it's only about 2 weeks ago that people were saying that though the Taliban had managed in its offensive, which it began back in May, to capture most of the Afghan countryside, the events had shown that they were unable to capture big cities or provincial centres, and that this would create a kind of stalemate or standoff between the Taliban and the forces of the Afghan government, opening room for negotiations. I have, as I think is fairly obvious, always been somewhat skeptical about this theory. It has always seemed to me that the momentum of the war clearly pointed to a Taliban victory, and a Taliban victory being achieved at some point this summer. But, as I repeatedly say, I'm not a military person, I'm not an intelligence analyst. I can only see things from afar and discuss them on the basis of what is reported in the open news. People who one would have expected to be more knowledgeable about these things all spoke instead of some kind of a stalemate continuing into the summer and perhaps autumn, and this seemed to me to be the largely universal consensus. What has happened instead is that the Taliban have shown over the last 2 weeks that they're not only able to capture big cities and provincial centres, they are practically managed in the space of just 2 weeks to capture all the main ones. So as I am making this programme, we've just received information or confirmation that the important city of Kandahar in the south of Afghanistan has now fallen to the Taliban. They still haven't yet captured the airport, though they're expected to shortly. There are reports that they've also captured the immensely important and culturally significant city of Herat. I can't definitely confirm that. They are claiming that they've captured Lashkar Gah, which is the capital of Helmand, and they've also captured the important town of Ghazni, which is on the road to Kabul itself. In the north, they now hold all the major cities and urban centres, except for Mazar-e-Sharif, which, by the way, from what I can tell, is the only big city in Afghanistan, other than Kabul itself, which is not in their hands. And the United States and its allies, at least its Anglo-American allies, are now rushing to evacuate their embassy staff from Kabul itself. Special forces have been deployed to Kabul, and apparently the embassies of the United States, Canada, and Britain are being evacuated. I expect that other Western governments are doing the same thing, though importantly, the governments of Russia, China, and India are keeping their diplomats in Kabul for the time being, at least. So all of this, by the way, suggests that the days when Kabul which is now practically the only important big urban centre, apart from Mazar-e Sharif, which remains in Afghan government control. All of this points to the fall of Kabul coming imminently. Now, we don't know how imminent that fall will be. There are some reports in the Russian media that the Taliban objective is to capture Kabul on the 27th of September, this being an anniversary of the first capture of Kabul by the Taliban in the 1990s. But I suspect that that is pure Russian guesswork. I doubt that they have that sort of information from the Taliban directly. I suspect, by the way, that the Taliban themselves are, to some extent, astonished by the speed of these developments and must be quietly assessing now what they're going to do and whether it is indeed in their interests to move on Kabul over the next few weeks. But it is possible, in fact, it seems to me it is quite likely that Kabul will indeed fall, probably after the US pullout is finally completed at the end of August, and we could see the Taliban back fully in control at some time in the first weeks of September. Now, all I am saying is the conventional wisdom, what has now become the conventional wisdom after the expectations of the long standoff and stalemate, that seems to be what most governments in most of the world cities are assessing. And by the way, the fact that the Americans, the British and the Canadians are evacuating their people from Kabul shows that they certainly do expect the city to fall, and that they expect it to fall within weeks, perhaps a month, certainly by some point in September, or at any rate, imminently. So why is everybody so angry about it, and what are they all angry about? Well, of course, in the case of the British and the Americans, but especially the British are furious that an operation that they had invested time and effort and money into, and which was greatly controversial in Britain itself, has turned out so disastrously wrong. And I've spoken in these programs about the, in my opinion, unbelievably foolish attempts of the British to try and organise a European expeditionary force to go to Afghanistan and take over the defence of the country from the United States. In the United States itself, it's probably fair to say that these events are not big news outside the Beltway, but you can be certain that there are recriminations and discussions and debates within the US government about why this operation in Afghanistan, this war in Afghanistan, has gone so wrong so quickly after the US troops left. I gather that there was a widespread assumption when the United States did decide to leave Afghanistan back in May, that the Afghan government in its present form would become unsustainable. But the expectation was that it would be able to hold out for at least 6 months, allowing a decent interval which would spare the US from embarrassment and which would give time and space for diplomatic action to take place, which might result in some kind of national unity government being negotiated that would be able to take over peacefully, denying the Taliban a clear-cut military victory. Well, all those expectations have fallen. They have turned to dust. And in the case of the Russians, and I suspect to some extent of the Chinese too, there is also anger and I suspect a great deal of exasperation. Because, as I have discussed in programs which I've made on this channel, the Russians have been working hard to open bridges to the Taliban, to negotiate with them, to discuss with the Taliban the setting up in Afghanistan of a broad-based government that would bring peace and stability to Afghanistan and which might integrate Afghanistan into the Eurasian institutions which are being created by China and Russia. And the Chinese, for their part, were also playing their role in this complicated diplomatic dance. They too received a Taliban delegation shortly after the Russians did, and like the Russians, they were offering an open door to the Taliban to integrate with the Eurasian states, and they were talking about major Chinese investment in Afghanistan. The worry that the Russians and the Chinese must now have is that all of this diplomatic effort, all this heavy lifting, is going to turn out for naught. Because, of course, if the Taliban storm into Kabul, take control of the country, they may become overconfident. They may become, as the Russians say, dizzy with success, and they may feel that they don't really need negotiations or discussions with any party. They certainly would not need to establish the kind of broad-based government that the Russians want them to, and they don't need to integrate in the Eurasian institutions in the way that the Russians and the Chinese, and to some extent the Iranians, are all urging them to. And it has to be said that this is a real danger now. The Taliban, as many people point out, Ben Wallace, the British Defence Secretary being a case in point, are hardly a united force. So there is a real possibility that the Taliban will say to themselves, well, we don't need to negotiate. We can just set about our own Islamic Emirate exactly as it was back in the 1990s. We can go back to the sort of system that we had in charge of Afghanistan. Then we don't need to negotiate it. Anybody, we've seen of the United States. Before that, we, or to be more precise, the Mujahideen, of which we formed a part in those days, saw off the Soviet Union. We are invincible. We are unconquerable. We can simply have the kind of Taliban, the kind of Afghanistan that we like. If the Taliban really think like that, then in my opinion, they are making a major mistake. They will very soon find that it is impossible to hold Afghanistan and bring it to peace if they try and establish the kind of theocratic, rigid regime that we saw in the 1990s. That ended in a disaster for them, and the same disaster would follow again. But will they now take a step back and think this through? Do they have that level of political sophistication, that deep understanding of international politics and of affairs that is required for them to bring about not just a stabilization of their country, but to lead it to peace? Perhaps that is a big challenge and a lot to ask for of a movement like this. But the next few weeks we'll see. It's easy to win on the battlefield, but it's sometimes not so easy to win the peace. We will see whether the Taliban this time are able to rise to that challenge. Well, thank you for joining me for this short video on this extraordinary topic. I look forward to you joining me in other programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also join or look up Alex's channel, which you find links to under this video. Please also remember to check us out on our new platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, ODYSEE, the new wonderful free speech platform, SuperU, and above all, Locals, where we have a thriving community in which you can fully participate, and we have in which we have grand ambitions, including for myself doing live streams. And also, if you want to support us, do so. You can do so via PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar, and by coming to our shop and buying the wonderful and amazing things you will find there. Our magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and all the rest. And I should say that we are refreshing what we have in our shop. Alex is bringing some wonderful hats into the shop. You desperately need to have those. They are magnificent. They are wonderful. I have already ordered mine. And last but not least, please remember to press the like button on this video if you've liked this video, and please also check your subscription to this channel. Much more to discuss about Afghanistan, I suspect, over the next few weeks. Not an easy topic sometimes to talk about, but perhaps in a way the geopolitics, the diplomacy, I suspect, is now going to crank up to absolutely dizzying speed as we enter the end game. So much to discuss. If you're interested in this topic, please come back and we'll talk about it more. And of course, there's lots of other topics we cover too. The Pacific situation, Europe, what's going on in Europe. We, of course, touch on the Middle East and other places also. So please join us on this channel, listen to my thoughts on all these topics, and I look forward to you joining me again soon.